Hey, real quick before we get started, I've gone back and I've finished the editing process, and there's just so much in there about Absorbian Man, future champions. There's even some teases if you really pay attention. That was pretty cool that DLL did that. And then also just about the design process in general and kind of his journey on that whole thing. I learned a lot. I was so excited to get a peek behind the curtain, so to say. And then I also want to make sure that you check out his champion spotlight with context video. Who else to learn how to play Absorbing Man than from the actual champion designer? The link to that will be in the description. All right, no more delays. Let's get to this interview. Hey, welcome back to the channel. We've got an extremely special, unique one for you today. I have actually got the opportunity to interview one of the champion designers for our favorite game, MCoC. He also happens to be an extremely longtime friend of mine, none other than Kabam DLL, Daddy Longlegs. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing good. Yeah, it's really cool to be here in this context. I definitely would not have imagined this back when you were talking me into starting a YouTube channel a couple years ago.
Dude, I'm so glad we did. And I apologize, viewer, you're just going to have to go to this. DLL and I met because of season 1 of Alliance War. He was leading an alliance. I wanted to try to get better at this game, and I do not know how or why, but he allowed me into his alliance. And I've very slowly but surely been getting better at this game ever since then. And so this is, I know it's obviously very cool for him, but it's incredible for me to be having this channel, but to be interviewing a designer who also happens to be a friend for what now, 6 years, 5 years, something like that?
Oh, God. Something like that, yeah.
And your champion, I know you can't see it, DLL, but your champion is actually on the screen. He looks amazing, absolutely amazing.
He really does.
He does. Like, Zemo looks cool, don't get me wrong, and yet somehow still Absorbing Man is stealing the screen. And so I think that's the best way to start this off, because I have asked a series of questions on my community page. Moderators on my Discord server were able to ask some questions too. What's your favorite thing about Absorbing Man? And about him specifically, because we have a lot of questions about you as a designer and that sort of thing. But if you don't mind telling us, like, literally, what's your favorite thing about the champion you've designed?
I think in a single sentence, I think I'd say that he feels complete to me, if that makes any sense, because it's like, it was a long journey building him. First champions do get a little bit more time, just because, you have things to learn. And with him in particular, I have mentioned before on my channel that the art process starts before the actual champion design process.
Oh, okay.
And so when I actually started work, the early brainstorming for Absorbing Man was done, and I was basically handed a paper that said, like, all right, you're on Absorbing Man. We've already told the art team that he's probably going to have like a metal mode and like a magma or a lava mode.
Oh, okay.
And then he's going to be normal and go forth and prosper.
Interesting. Now, was that and actually, before we get too much farther, what I want to let people know is, and you've mentioned a couple times your channel, I think most of my viewers hopefully know you have a channel, but if the case they don't, this is DLL's channel that's playing in the background, obviously with the champion reveal, but also some of the really cool war fights you're seeing him do. So make sure you check that out. The link will also be in the description for this. The question I have, though, is it wasn't totally clear to me. Did that happen because it was your first champion, and so therefore some of the work and the art had already been started on him, or is that just
exactly
the normal process?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Basically, another designer on my team, one of my colleagues, had kind of done the preliminary work, and then it was handed off because it lined up for me to ship my first champion now, basically.
Okay.
And so, like, that far ahead of time, that's what lined up.
Okay.
And so somebody else had gone to the early brainstorms and reviews where they had arrived at those broad outlines, and then that was handed off to me.
Okay. And then by the time this goes live, I think everyone will have probably seen his kit or have had a chance to do it. I've had a chance to now see it, briefly here. Clearly, that was just like you said, kind of a broad outline of the champion. So if you're able to, are you able to kind of explain to us how that differed from, I assume you've worked on a second champion or you're working on one, like, and how that's different, if you're able to talk about that at all?
Yeah, I think a little bit. So for my second champion, I was there from the beginning with the art team where, we, by that point, somebody has already kind of sketched or modeled them out, and we kind of know this is what they're going to look like in game.
Okay.
And so then we'll kind of go around the table, and people who know way more about animation than I do,
Of course.
say things along the lines of like, well, we normally don't have weapons out all the time. So like we tend to, like with Absorbing Man, you'll see he doesn't have the ball and chain out all of the time. They kind of save that more often for heavies or specials to make it count. And so like with that in mind, what kind of vibe are we going for? Like with Absorbing Man, he kind of feels like a boxer. So that's the kind of thing that you talk about then.
Yeah.
I want his basic attacks to feel kind of like he's boxing. Or
That's amazing.
Another recent one with Atuma, like that would be the stage where you go, well, we have to have a water bomb somewhere in there, right?
Okay. Yeah. I literally today on stream was talking about how I've been playing Cole Obsidian more lately, and I truly feel like I'm playing this massive brute who has a huge hammer and pulverizes defenders with it. So I think I've got a sense of what you're saying, which actually leads me to this. This question was asked, or in essence, this question was asked by quite a few people. How much say or input do you get on over spacing? Like, with the Tuma and like his light attack, you referenced him. Or I know we'll often talk about champions that want to punish things with their heavy or punish specials. Do you get to put that in or into I think that's in the kit a little bit too. And do you work with the art department, or how does that kind of transpire?
Yeah, there's some back and forth. And to be honest, I probably worked them a little bit harder for my very first character than I will on average, because that is a significant part of his kit.
Yeah.
The way it normally works is like, these people, like I said, are professionals. Most of them have been doing this significantly longer than I have. And so they take that early sketch of like, these are the weapons the character will or will not have. They will or won't have like laser blasts, projectiles, whatever. This is what their basics need to feel like. And they'll come up with something. And then there's one particular person who does a lot of the spacing things, and they're very good at the game. So it's normally in a really good spot from there anyway.
Yeah.
But at that point, that's when like we start doing our playtesting and we give feedback on like, hey, it would be really nice if this hit of the heavy had better coverage. Or like it would be really nice if like with Absorbing Man, it's important to counter his specials with your own heavy. So it's like, all right, we need the last hit of his heavy to be a contact hit because it needs to be close to you, right?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. And the irony, or the kind of cool coincidence, is that on the screen right now, Killmonger is beating up a Mr. Fantastic. And one of the things, like, as a community, we often say is Mr. Fantastic's heavy reach is not good, which is odd for a character known for their reach and the ability to stretch. And yet, in MCoC, if his heavy reach was incredible, he'd probably be overpowered. So it was kind of funny that you said, as that was on screen, you were talking about how the person who does the art is also very good at the game. And so I can't help but think, I'm telling myself that was intentional. They're like, we can't make him too overpowered. Because it looks like he has a good reach.
Back and forth, because like there's also the chance that early on in his development, the heavy wasn't as important.
Oh, okay.
Because like that could have been like, once like I mentioned, hey, the last hit of the specials needs to be a contact hit. That's the kind of thing that needs to be done sooner, right?
Okay.
So maybe they were past that when the heavy became more important, and then maybe it could have been changed, but it would have been harder. So then you go, actually, he's probably strong enough like this. Like that's the kind of give and take that there is.
He is. He's a fantastic champion, and I know you happen to really like him. All right, well, let's go ahead and move into the questions, because there's a ton of great ones. These are very good. So let's go and start with the first one if you're okay with it. Is first one's from Jaeger. I won't say who they're all from, but I happen to know you know Jaeger. So he says I'd like to know about how you start a champion. I think that a lot of us are good at fine tuning kits once we see them, but I can't imagine making a kit from scratch considering how fast the game is. I could not agree with him more. Like, it's easy for me, like, coincidentally, America Chavez is on the screen, and I had all kinds of ideas on how to make her the most powerful champion in the game, but actually starting from scratch, I can't imagine. So, like, how do you do that? Like, what did you do?
So this is actually one of the places where I think my background in music transferred over pretty well. Because both myself and my boss, who has a bit of a music background, we kind of talked early on about one of the things I learned in my composition classes was like limitations breed creativity. Okay. And so I think for my first champion, it was a very, very good thing that I was handed metal form, magma form, normal form. Right?
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Because then right away I was like, all right, well, I got to do something with metal. I got to do something with heat. Where do I go from there? And from like where I went from there is, all right, we're going to have a physical form. We're going to have an energy form. And that was kind of the basic duality. So from there, I was like, all right, well, do I want to attach these to special attacks? Because that's one of the easiest triggers that we have in this game. Or do I want it to be through some other form of gameplay that turns them on? As you know, I ended up going with special attacks. And that's because I thought that made the rotation cleaner.
Yeah.
I thought he would be a little bit too rigid if you always had to do a specific thing to access the forms.
Okay.
But the other side of it, and this is where our game logic informs things, is that he's a mystic. Mystics have a lot of power. They spend that power on specials. It made sense for me that the key to his kit was his special attacks.
Yeah, it does. That's really cool. That is really cool. I mean, you know, I mean, we've been friends for so long. One of my favorite things to do is theorize about why a champion's this way. Where's the game evolving? Where's it going? And so it's so cool to get this peek behind what we played for so long. It's amazing.
Yeah, but it definitely depends a bit because, like, you know, a peek behind my second champion in a couple months is that they started very much the other way. Like with Absorbing Me, and I was like, all right, I want physical and energy. And therefore, we had kind of already theorized before I took over, he's probably going to have some kind of immunities, which okay. I've seen the guesses in the community. Everyone guessed that.
Yeah.
So those immunities are obviously a big form of utility. Like you see, all right, well, I play a lot of war. Immediately, I start thinking about what combinations of utilities matter in war. What combinations of utilities do I feel like are missing from the Mystic class?
Yes.
We've all talked about, like, how is Mephisto the only one who can take the first part of Path 9? Everyone knows that, and so I was like, all right, that's probably going to be something that I want to include. And so, even though I had those limits on me of what the forms probably were going to be from the beginning, Absorbing Man kind of his design came from, I want him to be able to do this in game.
Uh-huh.
I want him to be useful here, whereas my next champion, their design process kind of started completely the other way. I was like, I want their kit to do this. I want you to play a specific way, and I want that to be how you get the payoff. I don't know what the payoff is yet, but I think that this thing is fun, and I want you to do this and that to be the whole deal, right?
Yeah, no, and I think I speak for the whole community when I say the payoff should be huge yellow numbers.
But like that's kind of still answering the same question that it depends. Sometimes there is a need in the game that we want to fill, and we see a specific champion filling that need. Sometimes it's a gameplay thing. Sometimes it's, I really like this character in the comics or in the movies or the TV shows, and so I think that they can be really good at this. It really depends, but basically you find something to hang on to,
Yeah.
and you spin it out from there.
I've read through all the questions that people are going to ask, and like you've touched on so many, so I'm avoiding the temptation to dive too much into any of those. And we're going to touch on a lot of the topics you just brought up. One of the things I don't think anyone asked, and so I'm going to ask it now, was were you familiar with Absorbing Man at all before you started designing him?
Only in the very broadest sense. Like once we started talking about him and I saw Carl Creel, I was like, wait, where have I seen that before?
Yeah.
And then I pulled up his wiki. I was like, oh, he was on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. I remember that one episode years ago.
Okay.
So I basically started by reading his wiki and going from there, honestly. I took a bit of a shortcut. But during the design process, I have read his first appearance. I read the Fear Itself comics event that his signature ability is a nod to, and I read one of his more recent appearances, the Gamma Flight series, which for me was probably the most influential in how I thought about him.
That's really cool. I don't know if he was one of the ones, I know there's people who run like the top 20 most wanted in game. I'm not aware of where he was in any of those, but I know that there was a community that desperately wanted him in this game and is incredibly excited to have him. And even just from the champion reveal, people are pumped up. People are really pumped up. Like even on my Discord server, like Aiden, whose question we're actually going to take next, was extremely excited for what you did with him. So here's Aiden's question. I being Aiden, I'm curious about Kabam's problem solving process when making a champion to counter specific problematic champion or interaction. What do they see on their end that makes them say, hey, we need a buff immune, or hey, we need some more auto blockers or something like that? In other words, you were kind of touching on this with some of your questions. Do you understand yeah, because I know I read it to you. You're pretty clear in the essence of the question.
Yeah, I think what I would say on that is that as a general rule of thumb, we try not to get too in the weeds on specific champions. Like, I'm not going to pretend that names like Quake and Hercules don't come up during our processes. They do. But when we're trying to think about problems to solve, and especially problems to solve as they pertain to class relationships, which is where things like buff immune comes from, I don't think the team will mind me saying, we often think in terms of locks and keys. And so buff immunity, or any kind of immunity really, qualifies as a key. That's something that you can use to open a particular lock. The lock being something like the way that Dormammu punishes you for having buffs. Or another way of thinking of it is that auto block is a lock that you can counter with True Strike most of the time. You can counter with Unblockable. Maybe you counter it with ability accuracy reduction. Like, there can be multiple keys. But you're thinking in terms of what is the problem, what is the solution, how do those line up across different classes and in specific kits.
Okay, so that's interesting. And so, is there ever a point, or is it ever a goal? Have you seen this, or where someone says, "I want to create a new lock"?
Yes.
Okay.
And like, I think that people have speculated on this. It's been long enough. That is kind of where Penny Parker came from. Yeah.
And then now it feels like you put out like 3 cosmics in a row who are various differing keys for her.
May have overcorrected just a wee bit.
Yeah. I mean, in my Battlegrounds tier list, I actually came up with a new emoji called "It's Not Her Fault She's This Good." Because like everyone's like, okay, we need to make sure we have answers for her. And it's funny because we're watching you beat up Gallon right now with your Valkyrie. So that's how good she is, though, right? She's that good, and I think it was a fun challenge for the game. Fortunately, she's very good offensively too.
Yes. So
plenty of uses for her. Okay, let's go ahead and move into some of the other questions here. The real cool was that so many of the people actually wrote like this from the Hoochinator here, saying, "I'm very happy for DLL." their love of Killmonger was all it took to assure me that they knew what they were talking about. Much respect. There's literally not even a question. They just wanted to tell you thank you. All right, so here we go. When building synergies, do you talk to the designers of other champions? And I think in essence, like the people who design those champions to see what kind of impact they would have on the character. So if you could maybe take that as like a synergies question, how do you come up with them? And then how do you look to make sure they make sense?
I mean, I think the process differs a little bit for different people. For the most part, I do talk to the designers for those characters, assuming that they are still here.
Yeah, good point.
Like one of my synergies is with Immortal Abomination. He's no longer here. Like his designer is no longer here. And so for that one, I was going less with, hey, what does IBOM need? And a lot of Carl's synergies in particular were thinking about, okay, he absorbs something from the class that he has the synergy with, and they get something from him.
I can't believe I didn't put that together. That's very cool.
Yeah, he kind of made that part a little bit easier for me, honestly. But so that's why he gets poison immunity from that synergy. And then IBOM gets energy resistance from him so that he has an answer both to physical damage and to energy damage, kind of like Absorbing Man.
That is really cool. I did not pick up on that nugget. That's really cool. At what point, so how would you approach if someone came to you, or has this maybe even happened, where someone's like, hey, I really want to provide a synergy for Absorbing Man? Is that a conversation that takes place, I guess? I'm not asking specifically for that because I'd probably be giving away some future stuff. But like, is that theoretically, is that a conversation that takes place?
Yeah, for sure. And I have had that conversation more for my second character, but about a few of her potential synergy partners. Where we have exactly that, where it's like, it's not like, hey, if you could fix one thing, because it doesn't mean that the other champion is broken. That's not for me. That's not what a synergy should do. A synergy is not something that fixes something you messed up. A synergy is, hey, this is something that probably shouldn't have been in their base kit. It would have made them a little bit too consistent, or they wouldn't have been focused enough on the problems they were trying to solve, whatever, but it would be helpful, right? It would let them answer more problems. It would make them a little bit more consistent. It would make their upkeep easier, etc., etc. Like Rogues is a good example, although I didn't talk to her designer, where it's just pause the buffs, right?
Yeah.
So something along those lines is more what those conversations would do. And so, I haven't had that conversation with Absorbing Man yet, but there are definitely places in his kit where I may have toned things down or intentionally said he doesn't need to solve that problem too, where a synergy could be appropriate.
Okay, now we've already covered some of this question earlier in the interview, but there's this second part to the question that I think is really interesting. I'd love to give you a chance to kind of talk on it. In essence, what they're asking, like, what was set in stone by Kabam Marvel beforehand, but we already kind of talked about that with Absorbing Man. The follow-up part, or the second part to the question was, what aspects of the design do you have the most freedom with? What aspects did you have the most fun with, or do you have the most fun with? And then lastly, was there anything like you couldn't incorporate that you want to in like a future champion or something like that?
Ooh, I'll answer that backwards because yes, there are absolutely things that I tabled.
Okay.
That I would just like, either they're not right or it's too much. Like I said earlier, something about something being a synergy because it would distract from the focus of the character.
Yeah.
That's the kind of thing that I mean. Because I realize there's some irony here. Because if you read through Absorbing Man's Spotlight, it is not short.
No.
Nor is his kit, even if you strip out all the extra stuff I say. And so you may kind of wonder, what does this guy mean focus? This champion doesn't seem focused to me. But that is something that we aim for, and a lot of the stuff in his kit, I think, is all pointing in the same direction.
Yeah.
Like I actually, you always use the word flow.
Yeah.
I hate to say this myself because most people in the community have not played him yet, but I do think that his flow is pretty good and that things kind of fit together better than they read. And I think some of this extra stuff serves that purpose because as I was building him, like I said, I kind of started with, all right, forms. I'm going to do physical, I'm going to do energy. They're each going to have immunities associated with them. That was square one.
Okay.
The second thing I thought was, okay, immunities alone are kind of boring. Let's do physical burst damage for one, energy burst damage for the other. And so I set up the forms and we were kind of going through reviews, going through play tests, and I think that when it comes to freedom, like you really have an absolute ton of freedom in the process.
Okay.
If you start doing something that is dramatically out of the scope of the game or the class that you've been assigned, you're probably going to get some pushback from your colleagues because there are a lot of very smart people on the team.
Yeah.
But that's not always a veto, right? Like it's pushback. It's not you're stupid, don't do this, right?
Yeah.
If you can justify it, if you can change it, adjust it a little bit so it makes more sense, you're often allowed to do that. And one of the things I like about our process the most is that oftentimes people will say, well, this doesn't feel quite right to me, but then it's up to you to go back to the workshop and fix that problem. So like one of the things that came up a lot with Absorbing Man is characters with forms are something that's considered difficult in the company because it's very difficult for there not to be a form that's considered best, right?
Oh, just a clarifying question for myself and viewers. Would Clairvoyant be considered a champion with forms?
Yes. And that's a very good example because I like all three of hers.
Yeah, same
but
here.
especially when you're talking to people who think that she has to be used with the recoil tree masteries, there is a clear best form.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
So yeah, she's a very good example of that. Somebody like Emma Frost would be another. To some extent, even Hitmonkey counts because one of his stances gives you the critical bleeds, which is normally what you want in Battlegrounds, and the other one doesn't.
Yeah, but so few of us know how to actually control which stance we're going to be in, so it doesn't matter.
There is that. But like, so that's something I kept hearing over and over in design reviews is like, you can't have one of the forms feel dramatically better than the other. And so that was always on my mind. The other thing I heard was, well, I get why you would want to stay in one form all the time for immunities, right?
Yeah.
But is it going to be fun for me to stay in one form all the time? What do I get for staying in one form all the time other than not dying to bleed damage? And on the flip side, in a more vanilla fight where I don't need the immunities, am I penalized for switching between forms? Because those two things are at cross purposes, because one of the things in the kit that I'm particularly proud of is the refined form thing.
Yeah. Okay, I understand where you're going with this now. Yeah.
Right. If you stay in the same form, then you get extra powerful benefits.
Yeah.
But then part of the problem that came from that was, okay, well now if you want to switch, you're starting over. And at the same time, there was this question of like, well, I built these pauses into the kit to make it easier to maintain the forms, but people were saying as long as I get to the next special attack, while before the form expires, that's all I care about. What am I getting for being better about pausing, right?
Yeah.
And so that's why the morph charges are in there, because that was my answer to both of those problems. This is a currency that you can use to kickstart going from one form to the other without starting all the way over. This is also a currency that rewards you for being better about your form maintenance.
Yeah.
Like, it's just, for me, it was kind of like I was getting all of this feedback, not telling me that I was doing a bad job, but basically just saying, this is a challenge I don't feel like you've solved yet. This is a problem with this kind of character. How are you going to solve it? And there was a lot of like good feedback. I think there was one playtest in particular where somebody said, like, what do I get for doing the thing better? And I went home I work at home, but I went downstairs to eat dinner that night. And that was just kind of like tossing around in my head. And I was like, oh, literally just a currency for doing the thing better. And for me, that was what like really brought the kit together.
That's pretty awesome to hear. Out, I think that's collaborative. Would you say?
Yeah, I think it's a very collaborative process, and I really like my team. It's a lot of fun. And
that shows a lot on your part for like trusting people who've kind of been there before too, you know?
Yes. I mean, I talked earlier with Synergies about like, I think I said something about also characters not solving too many problems.
Yeah.
That was something I was told several times early on, was try to make sure, or not try to make sure, was don't try to make your first character perfect.
Yeah.
Because it's so tempting. You have more time. You can fix all of the problems. You can make them do all of the things. But that doesn't mean that it's a good idea.
Yeah. So you fought off the temptation to remove Hercules' immortality, is what you're telling me.
Right. And
I know.
No, I'm not even going to joke because I could say something.
I know.
People might think is fair.
Bunch of layers there.
I feel like he is a very good character. I badly want him on my own roster. I'm really excited for him to come to the game, and I think he adds a lot. But he definitely is not the last Mystic you will ever need, right?
That's cool. I mean, that is cool, and that's obviously the game's so big. We talk about this all the time. That's a good thing. That's a very, very good thing, and it leaves space for all the other Mystics that you enjoy playing. All right, now we'll move on to a question from Larry. I know he's a pretty loyal viewer for both yourself and me. And so first of all, he's congratulating you, and then he says, what are the layers that are built? Like, what comes first, second, third? Specials, attributes? Are you creating the text of the character that we read? And then that vision is handed off to the animations and design team. So I think it's a little, we've touched on a lot of this, but not in one single question. If you can kind of talk a little bit about like what happens first, second, third, and so forth.
Yeah. So like I said, it's not that animation necessarily always happens before everything else, but I would say it's probably more accurate to say animation is set in motion before everything else. Mm-hmm. And then, like you'll have a review with, hey, this is what the animation is looking like. And at that point, you're expected to have at least made some progress on what the kit's going to look like. So you can give some more feedback, make any requests while there's still time, that kind of thing. As far as special attacks being early or later, that probably depends very much on the character. Because like I said, for a character like Absorbing Man, the specials were something, at least the special 1 and 2, I basically had locked from day one. I remember very clearly that I had one day where I went to bed not really having any ideas, and then I woke back up like I couldn't fall asleep, and I wrote myself a couple notes because the kit had started to crystallize. And then like that morning I woke up only 6 hours later, which is not enough sleep for me, but I had more ideas and I knew I was not going to fall back asleep. And so I got up and I typed out like the first draft of his kit then.
Really? That's a cool story.
It was honestly it was so much fun. I was like, oh, this is what composing felt like in undergrad.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what I was kind of thinking of it to like literary or music. Yeah.
Yeah. It's exactly scratching that itch. I love it. But like his special 1 and special 2 haven't really changed since then.
Really?
Yeah.
That's pretty cool to know. All right.
And so for him, that's where they started, and everything else was built around that. Like the pauses are kind of reflecting how much time you need to get back to a special 2, the way that the morph charges build up, the way that you can cash them out. Actually, even the fact that the morph charges have an optional cash out on medium, light, medium is because everything else was built off the specials. And I was actually told, like, you have kind of a low level mastery for this character, where the first thing that a player needs to understand is you want to maintain your forms, right?
Yeah.
And you have a very high level mastery ask for this character, which is the light interrupts and the heavy counters. But what I was told was you have this like level 101 and 103, but where's the 102?
Okay.
And so the putting the choice in the hands of the player to cash out early if it's advantageous for them is kind of intended as that 102. That's where that came from.
Okay.
And so, like, with this champion, the specials kind of came first, with a few things attached to them, and everything else spun out from it, like we've talked about. But with another character, it might be very, very different. Like, I imagine, let's say when they were building Elsa, those special attacks have their identities, but I'm guessing that that design process probably started more with the ammo, right?
Okay. Yeah.
And so everything else probably came from there. The attributes can also come in at any particular part of that. Like, we do try and do something to make the attributes a little bit different. With Absorbing, he actually... I added the crit resist a bit later, because I was trying to avoid adding crit resist. For anyone who knows me probably understands why.
You love that so much about Doom, though. That's weird.
Oh, God, yes. Well, there's a reason that his isn't 35%. But basically, it was just we were working around the kit, and I was realizing that I had made it so that there were enough answers to his defensive kit. And enough weaknesses built into his attacker kit that it was like, all right, the crit resistance does kind of tie things together.
Okay. And that actually kind of ties into a question I was wondering. A couple of people have asked versions of this. Is, in essence, how do you make sure the character is not too strong, or how do you try to make sure they're not too strong, while also not making sure, or trying to make sure that they're not coming out a little weaker than you intended?
Yeah. So some of it is theoretical, right? From the very beginning, like I said, we try and think in terms of locks and keys, where it's like, where is this champion going to be useful? Are they going to completely solve that problem so that no one else will ever need to solve it again?
Yeah.
Or are they going to be like particularly good at forms of that problem, but not all of them? Which I think is probably where we want to end most of the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then from the theoretical part, we have our playtests, where, we have a lot of different skill levels represented on the design team, which is very helpful for that, because, if somebody who tells you that they're the weakest player on the team is staying at full health the whole time, it's maybe not a good sign. Or if they're like, I have no idea what I'm doing, but I killed Winter Soldier in 20 seconds. Also not a good sign.
Yeah.
And then, like, on the flip side, if one of the stronger players is doing something really broken, then you go, okay, so maybe I can pare that down a little bit so that there's like a shadow of it. There's a cool thing at the upper level, but it's not super broken. So, like, that's kind of what we get into with playtests. And then the final level of that is that when I'm done with the character, I hand it over to QA to find bugs, but also to the balance team.
Okay.
And that's when they go and they do their, like, DPS testing. How good are they in vanilla fights? How good are they against their target defenders?
Got it.
How good are their target attackers against them? That kind of thing.
Okay.
And so sometimes in that part of the process, you'll get, like, hey, we need to tone this down because it's being too dominant, or we need to boost this up because they're not having quite the impact we wanted.
Okay. I mean, that it's cool to hear the process. It makes complete sense. And I think we've seen it with balancing this year. I think it's been a little bit of a peek behind the curtain, so to speak. Like with Gallon's my favorite one. You know, it came up a lot. People were like, yeah, I can't believe you took him to rank 4. In the beginning, it was, can't believe you took him to rank 4, Vega. He's going to get nerfed. And I stayed consistent with my answer, which was, I think they knew that he was able to do this. They knew this. And so that's why I think he's going to be fine. And lo and behold, it was, yeah, we knew he was going to be able to do this, and he's fine. So it's cool just to
the other
hear the
flip
full
side
process.
that I always say is that even if he had been adjusted,
Yeah.
it still would have been Gallon.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that I obviously I don't know. I'm not privy to the
I
various
know, and like
conversations,
none of us
so-
really know, but like that's like I'm saying that's the way that we approach these things. Like Gallon was intended to crush Penny, right?
Yeah. They weren't going to
we
be
knew
like
the kinds of things he would be good at. If he had been adjusted, he still would have been very good at the things that he was supposed to be very good at, because that's the character that he was intended to be.
Totally. They weren't going to say like, we're going to half his damage, but we're going to give him True Strike. There you go.
Oh God, I just have like a sympathetic headache for the balance team at trying to evaluate a new kit from scratch.
Yeah, it's. I'm glad someone's doing it, and I'm glad I'm just the guy that plays the game instead.
I know exactly what you mean. Some people know I applied to be a balance designer actually, and ended up here because Kabam felt that my skill set was more this. And I am incredibly grateful for that.
Yeah, you know what, man? And you know what's funny is that when we did the intro, we didn't talk about this that much. So for people viewing, this might feel a little backwards. But I recall when you told me that you had gotten the position, my immediate thought was, you know, that makes so much sense. Like, you are going to design amazing champions. Like, again, I've known you for however long war's been going on. In your ability to understand these champions, like you've always used terms like internal synergy, while I'm using terms like flow, you know,
which both very much have their place.
They 100% do. It's just your understanding of them, and so to see you actually create them. Like, I've read Carl's kit, and I think everyone knows by now. Carl is Absorbing Man. Flow looks outrageous. It looks. So this leads into a question that I've been wanting to ask is, you know, we often talk about like Tigra as being this high skill champion. Mantis is definitely being, I think the idea is you're going to need to be high skill with her, and probably at the game too. I'm not sure what the limits we're giving here are, so I'll let you kind of just come up with them. Where do you feel like Carl lands in that Absorbing Man? Is he intended to be that? Is he not? Where did he ultimately land?
So I think this is where I'll put my shameless plug, and I'll say that I will talk a little bit more about this when I do my Spotlight with Context video on him.
Yeah.
But I think the short version is that if you're using him in the matchups that he is laser focused on, like if you're using him against Annihilus, if you're using him on Hazard Shift Shock Bleed, if you're using him on something that is triggering his pauses all over the place, he really doesn't ask much of you. He's just going to kind of crush through.
Nice.
And the better you are at the game, and the better you are at playing him, at extracting those little extra bits of uptime on the pauses, at landing more heavies, at canceling them into more specials, the more fights are going to feel that good.
Okay.
So I do think that his skill ceiling is pretty high.
Okay.
But I did intentionally try and put his floor fairly low, because I wanted him to be useful in war. And I've told our friend Clown this. One of my guiding principles in his design process was Red Hulk. because he is just so incredibly simple at those hazard shift fights that he's good for.
Yeah.
And I knew that Absorbing Man was going to be a little more complicated than that. For one thing, there's the Mystic thing, so his specials were going to matter. But I kind of always wanted to keep Red Hulk in my peripheral vision, so to speak. And be like, I want this to be a character that when you're using him for those fights, he feels almost this simple.
That's really cool. That's really, really cool. And I understand what you're saying now on it. That's really cool. And I can see, for those who don't know, Clown loves Red Hulk.
It is his favorite champion in the entire game.
Almost more than anyone should. But, that's for another, that's for another, that's a different interview. Okay, now this next question is from Simula, and it's actually a two-part question. The first part is, if you could delete one champion from the game, why would it be Domino? And two, curious how you feel about champions who are buffed via synergies rather than an actual buff, meaning I think, without the synergy, the champion gets buffed themselves. And in-game content, a full synergy team is almost never practical, but it seems like such champions, Airwalker come to mind, are unlikely to receive a needed buff. And if I could add my own kind of little part to that, one of the things I still really enjoy doing, like synergy videos, synergy teams, I do think there's a place, like as far as like maybe in-game questing, where you can get through with one champion nowadays, and story content and that sort of thing. But it does feel very different than like 3 or 4 years ago, where I felt like these very powerful synergy teams could maybe be brought to war or be utilized. So I do feel like there's been an evolution. Ends up being two questions for you there. So I'll let you kind of go at it.
Yeah, well, first off, on the evolution with synergy teams, I know you and I are on the same page with this, but that's exactly why I've always considered it such a knock on a powerful synergy if it's the same class as the character.
Yes. God, I don't like that.
Right. Like, I hate to use a specific example because I don't want to be calling out my colleagues, but I am. I'm not calling them out, but I am using a specific example. But the Airwalker synergy for Nova that allows him to refresh his Furies more easily.
Yeah.
It's a fantastic synergy. I like Nova. I like Airwalker. I'm usually not putting them on the same team because it's two cosmics.
Can I give you another one, and maybe you can tell me why it's okay? And I think the answer you're going to give me is that they are very different, and I do get that, and I see that. But it's the synergy with Penny Parker and infamous Iron Man.
Oh yeah, the one where they cover each other's bases.
I love that synergy for each of them, but it's just, and I know they do different stuff, but they're both tech.
Right, there's an upper limit on it because they're both tech and they both do kind of tech things.
Yeah, I mean, I guess they have different like immunities and stuff, so whatever. But it's just something that just kind of it sits oddly with me.
Right, and they have a place in the game, but yeah, those synergies will always be slightly less powerful.
Yeah, yes. There you go. Good word for it. Yeah.
Yeah, but I don't think that we should be buffing characters through synergies, to use those words. I think that because the thing is that like if you do a small thing for a character that can later be incorporated into a buff, that's fine.
Yeah.
So Airwalker is actually a good example of that, because my two favorite synergies of his are, obviously everyone knows the Penny Parker one is great.
Yeah.
But I actually think that the one with Ebony Maw is arguably more important because the power gain makes him feel more playable in that first fight when he only has one charge.
Yeah. Yes.
But that's the kind of thing that you could just easily incorporate into a tune-up. Like the Penny Parker one, you might be a little bit harder because a certain amount of his balance probably is built into not having access to his special 3, but the Ebony Maw one could easily just be folded in and then turned into something else. The problem comes when the synergy makes the character so strong that when you eventually give them their own kit and decouple them from always needing that second character, or sometimes third, there are going to be people who see it as a nerf.
Well,
and it doesn't even really matter if it is.
Yeah.
And so then that becomes something that's difficult to navigate.
Yeah.
And the minute a buff becomes difficult to navigate, you're going to get fewer designers on our side of things who want to tackle that rework.
I mean,
and I'm just speaking frankly, like, because it's going to be a bit less fun, and you know that you're going to have more constraints, and people are going to be more worried about what you put out, and you know that when you finally do ship it, if you do your job correctly, there's going to be a non-zero percentage of the community that's very angry with you.
So it's interesting that we're talking about synergies, and on the screen here, you were, I think, using Toad, and I was curious about that. Toad, it feels like every new champion that comes out has some synergy with Toad. I don't think yours does, but is someone monitoring that? Is that intentional? Is it accidental? Can you talk a little bit about that? Because Toad does have a lot of synergies. He's on a lot of teams for new champions. Does everyone just like him? Are you able, what can you tell us about that, if anything?
I think it's a few different things. I think a lot of people like Toad. Okay. There's a lot of really great design decisions in Toad.
Yeah.
I can tell you that in a lot of our other discussions, it has come up more than once where you're like, oh, you know how you could solve that problem? Do this thing that Toad did.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
But I think that it's also... it's not going to hurt any feelings, even Toad's designer, if I say that he is not one of the top 3 mutants. He's not one of the top 5 strongest characters of 2022.
No. Yeah.
And so if I can say that objectively, then that also means that he's kind of in that perfect power level where a minor synergy isn't going to break anything.
No. Okay.
And so that's the kind of thing where it's just kind of fun to tag onto your own character. Like the Hulkling one is great. It's you can just tell the designer for Hulkling was like, oh, Prince and the Frog is cute wordplay. He's going to have a synergy with Toad.
That's one of the ones yes, that's it. And then I think there's a Tuma as well, right? You went over that in one of your videos on a Tuma. There's quite a few. I think he's with Man-Thing. He's got a really great synergy with Scorpion. If we really pulled up Aunt May, we could go on and on. And then I can't believe we've gone this far in this video.
I know, we have to go back to Sims.
Well, is the other champion that was on screen while we were talking about synergies was Immortal Hulk. I think for all the Immortal Hulk players out there who've been wanting to play him in War, I think I should say thank you to you for that. I don't think you're a huge Immortal Hulk player, are you? And so how did that come about? What made you decide to do that?
So, a couple answers to that. For one thing, no, I'm not an Immortal Hulk player. I literally pulled the 6-star within the last week and a half.
And was the synergy added 5 days ago?
No. So, what I wanted to do was I wanted Absorbing Man to have access to poison immunity.
Okay.
But I didn't want it to be in his base kit. And it wasn't to make him running Path 9 harder. It was actually more of a defensive consideration. Because if you look at all the immunities he has, and then you take a look at the science class and what kinds of damage they have access to, closing off poison would have been a bit of an issue. It would have kind of shrunk pretty dramatically how many good answers there were to him, and so I didn't want to do that.
Got it. Okay.
But I wanted him to still have it. And so then a synergy with iBomb was perfect to me. And I know that he had history because he has been to the Below place where Immortal Abomination is from. Immortal Abomination is one of the villains in Gamma Flight, which I referenced. But I also knew that if I gave a synergy to iBomb, I pretty much needed to give one to iHulk.
Okay.
And I got to admit, that scared me because I know enough about iHulk to figure out that his tuning was probably pretty difficult.
Yeah.
And moving dials one way or the other would probably lead to some pretty scary videos.
Yeah. Yeah.
With my name attached to them.
As if Buddy Lee hasn't already put out enough of them.
Right. We did not need to go back down that road. And so then I was thinking about it, and in brainstorming, I actually very discreetly, I'm sure he had no idea why I was asking, reached out to our friend B McG, because I knew that he played iHulk, and I was kind of tossing it back and forth. And in talking to him, it kind of hit me. I was like, here's this player who plays war at a very high level, is willing to assign weirder champions. That's something we have in common.
Yes.
Loves iHulk, is able to give me feedback here, would never assign iHulk in war. That's what I want to fix.
That's why. Yeah.
And so obviously this does not make him like completely immune to ability accuracy reduction. If you're on like Hard Knock Life and you stack 20 disorients, yeah, Assassin's gonna fail when you finally get hit.
Yeah.
Or sorry, Immortality is gonna fail.
Yeah.
But to come back to my Freudian slip there, Assassin alone won't stop him anymore.
That's pretty awesome. I know that when I saw it, it made me think, is this the day I finally decide I'm going to learn how to play iHulk? Because he does seem incredibly cool. But as someone who only can focus on so many things in this game at a time and loves war, he's a champion I just completely set aside because I knew he would literally never get assigned.
Right.
So why do
And I don't know if he will now, but I hope people start thinking about it at least.
Yeah, well, I think that's it, right? Is at least the main reason why we was never considered has now been removed. So I think that's pretty awesome. So that's really cool. And I think you fully answered Sumula's question. Was there anything else you wanted to add on that?
Oh, he asked if I could only delete one champion. Why would it be done?
Yeah. So I'll change that question a little bit to, if there was any change you could, like, if they were like, DLL gets to be CEO for the day, and you could do anything that was irreversible with MCoC, what would you do?
Oh, well, I think you know my answer because of the trending video we did last year. I would just delete power back boosts.
Oh, that's it. That's the one. Really?
I really do think so, yeah. Because so many other problems stem from that. Like, people talk about balance, but like, there are characters it wouldn't fix. Hercules would still be overpowered.
That's why I'm so surprised. Okay.
But there are a lot of characters that it would. Like, Corvus is the main one who just worrying about Corvus charges would still be a thing, but you would be able to counter it by going, oh, he's not going to get to enough special twos to finish that fight in time. He's not going to trivialize this real defender.
Yeah. Before he's got to charge. Yep, that's true.
Right. Or the player's going to have to be really good and is going to have to survive until their charges come back, which has always been a possibility, but is just not something we do.
Well, it feels like that was the point of his signature ability.
I'm sure it was.
Okay. Well, I'm glad we solved that one.
Right. And so, like, it's possible that parts of the map would need to be changed, but I guess that's the thing, is I would delete power back boosts and I would give more time to war planners, because I realize that, like, planning without power back boosts would be harder. And so you would need more time to come up with alternates.
Yeah.
But I do think they exist.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. Dude, I have to say, this was so much fun. This feels... And I'm realizing there was the final question that I wanted to ask you, and I think this is the perfect way to go out, is... I know you can't tell us what champions you're designing, and so I'm not asking that.
Right.
But as the game goes on, and this game appears to have plenty of legs, are there classes, are there specific characters, which I guess you probably answer, or specific things, let's say, that you would like to bring to the game, or problems you'd like to try to help answer, if you can answer that at all?
Yeah, well, I mean, you mentioned classes, so the short answer there is that I would like to kind of do the checklist, right? I would like to design one character of every class. I would like to do a batch of relics, because that now also kind of counts.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I want to ship at least a couple reworks. That's kind of the big stuff there. As far as specific characters, I have finally started reading more comics and outside characters that, like, I've been assigned.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I do have a few thoughts there. Like, one of the big ones for me now would be Blue Marvel. And I know that the odds of him winning a Summoner's Choice anytime soon may not be particularly high, but he's just such a cool character. That would be very, very high on my list. And then I think I mentioned this to you the other day. The other kind of funny answer after reading the all-new Wolverine series from 2015 is Honey Badger, because that would just be awesome.
Sounds awesome. Well, this was an absolute blast. I said it earlier, like, just this feels a bit surreal, the whole experience, and I could not be more proud of my friend and excited that he is a part of this game that I absolutely love playing. Thank you so much for being for doing this interview, DLL. And all the viewers, please make sure you keep an eye out. I know that I will do my best to stream test this champion. I'm going to do my best to stream test all champions that come into the game this year. I'm going to definitely, if you haven't already decided you're going to, DL, I'm going to try to convince you to stream test. I think everyone would love the actual designer of the champion to do a test. That'd be pretty incredible. And then, of course, viewers, make sure you keep an eye out. DLL will be releasing his own what is it called again?
Spotlight with context is what I'm saying. It's basically a guide without gameplay.
Yeah, they're fantastic. I download and listen to all of them multiple times. They are always so helpful to me in understanding the champions. So I cannot recommend that more. The link to that will be in this description. And then DLL, this was all about you. So I would love it if you would sign us out.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, man. Like you said, this is surreal. And yeah, it was a lot of fun. And like I said earlier, thanks again for convincing me to start a channel, because that set me down this whole road.
I'm glad to hear that. Okay. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. Take care. All right, so we have another question here. This one's from Kat Murdoch. I know you know her well. And she said, your new champion is tasked with hosting a small gathering and needs to prepare the snacks. What items do they include in the charcuterie board?
Ooh.
I know.
That's a good one.
It is a good one.
Because Carl's very rough and tumble.
Yeah.
So probably, like, I imagine his charcuterie board has some, like, of his favorite basics that he just insisted on including. So there's going to be, like, plain cheddar and Ritz crackers.
Yeah.
But I feel like he's also, like, made an attempt to class himself up for Titania. Okay. And so, like, I don't know, maybe some of that, like, special reserve cheese that he picked up in the nicer part of the supermarket.
Okay. Is there craft beer in here at some point? Is that what I'm assuming? It's beer, but it's stepped up a bit.
That sounds about right. I remember I went in Pittsburgh. I remember picking up this one particular cut of sausage that had been, like, made with a kind of beer. That sounds like it would be the kind of fancy thing that would appeal to him.
Beautiful. All right, and I hope you either learned something, were entertained, or even better, a little bit of both. Don't forget to like, subscribe. Thanks so much for watching. Take care.